Graham Coffey with us, 365 Sports. Graham's been on with us many times back when Baylor played Georgia in the Sugar Bowl during the time when they were about to be really good. They were good. They were better that day for sure, but also a part of Dawgs Central, covers Georgia and the SEC. So, Graham, there's been so much discussion. We've had a lot of different guests on it about the expansion of the college football playoff. And I thought, at least in my opinion, that most anybody from the Big Ten or the SEC would love kind of how we've heard this might be set up. But you are a protector of the game itself in the regular season, and I saw you went off. So what are your thoughts about any potential expansion?
Yeah, I think that when you predetermine which conference is going to get how many into the playoff every year, you take a lot of the drama out of these early season out-of-conference games. You may really turn them into a glorified preseason if you're actually just saying all you got to do is be top four in the SEC or Big Ten or whatever league. And then on top of that, I think that, you look at the conferences as they are. The SEC, for example, if you had tried to take the top four teams this year and gone down and you would have ended up in a tie, a six-way tie at one point in this process of trying to figure out, who comes in. So I think there's this desire to eliminate the subjectivity in our sport, but subjectivity in our sport is what's fun. It's what creates arguments. It's what creates good segments on radio and television, right? And I don't like this idea that we're going to press and predetermine all this, because there could be a time where the Big 12, NIL, transfer portal, there's a lot of upward mobility there. You could have a year where the Big 12 deserves 3 teams. You could have a year where, the SEC deserves more than 4. It's just a really dangerous road to go down. And I think it devalues the regular season in a way where that is what this sport has always been about. And it's always been about elimination games all throughout the season. And if you get rid of that and especially if we go down this route of doing this play-in game weekend, you're basically distilling 12 games into one weekend. And I think you'll turn yourself into a March Madness style product where some people will watch, diehards will watch, but most people will come back and tune in on the first weekend of December and say, I watched my college football for the year.
Yeah, Graham, you made a great point about those are games that no one asked for. Literally no one asked for. No one was saying that. They just said, hey, can we make these conference championship games more valuable if both Georgia and Texas are going to get in the SEC and both Oregon and Penn State are going to get in the Big Ten? We're just talking about seeding here. And that's maybe not as exciting as it should be, because there was no chance that whoever was going to lose either of those games were going to be out. That's what we were saying. So expanding it actually makes that way worse and more boring, right?
Right, it does. And you're not crowning a champion, and you also – what you're really doing here, if you want to be brutally honest about the process that's happening, is the SEC, the Big Ten, all of the conferences have gotten themselves hooked on the money that comes from selling the television right to their conference championship game. And instead of giving that up to get what they want with some of this expanded playoff and trading that game for maybe an extra CFP game that they'll probably get a share of the dollars of, they're trying to do this really convoluted process of coming up with a play-in tournament or having, number 4 and number 5 play for that 4th auto bid and all this stuff just because they're addicted to those dollars. And I think that it's a really, really dangerous process when you think about this idea, because that extra game or these extra games, they would be worth something in the projections that they're doing right now. But if you get to the end of this contract with ESPN or whoever buys these rights and nobody's watching regular season college football anymore and the sport has been damaged because of it, then you basically tried to go out and create a few extra games to sell rights to. And what you did was cost yourself the value of everything that comes before it. It is very much like trying to put the cart before the horse, in my opinion.
How many others who are not entrenched but cover the SEC like you do have the same opinion as you? Because I would have thought That's one of the things I was like, whoa, what's Graham talking about today? And I was like, I enjoyed your perspective.
Well, I appreciate that. And I think that most people that come to this job and vocation because you love college football and you're a fan of college football, agree with it, whatever conference they're in. And the SEC is included in that. And I think like talking to people, what we all miss already in this 12-team format is those 3:30 games late in October or early November where, you're coming into the second half and the sun is going down in the corner of the stadium and it feels like the entire world is on the line between Georgia and Auburn or whoever, right? Whatever your rivalry is. And we've already lost a little of that dynamic when we look at a sport where, let's be honest, Ohio State lost to a 5-loss Michigan, their arch rival, on the final weekend of the season and won a national title. The regular season has been devalued. And so how much more are you going to devalue it before people look up and say, this thing that I loved, that I used to arrange my life around and my travel schedule and my kids' sports and all of that, like, it's not worth my time anymore because these regular season games, if I miss one, it doesn't matter because the losses don't matter. So I think all the people that most of the people I talk to feel the same way that I do about this and feel like if you pre-assign all of this, that you are fundamentally changing what the sport has been for well over 100 years.
Graham, I want to call back something you said earlier when you said if you have 4, then that means there could be a year where the SEC could get more than that. Now, this has been more of a Big Ten thing on the AQs because I think Tony Petitti saw, hey, we got 4 teams this year. We don't ever go below that. Greg Sankey, and for all the crap we give him, because I do think he's a little bit of college football's Darth Vader, he has never really been very vocal about automatic qualifiers because I think in his mind he knows if we lock in that I get 4 and they get 4, and the Big Ten gets 4 and 2 and 2 and Notre Dame, that means on that magical year where I can really say, hey, we've got 6 that deserve to go in there. They're not going to get that 6 because there won't even be room for those teams because you've now given those spots away to, ostensibly the Big Ten in most cases because they're the other one with 4. So those are the things that I think would drive me nuts if I were Greg Sankey of, am I giving up my opportunity to really say, like, I have half the playoff field and it's all based on merit and none of this other BS, which is what he's been saying.
No, and I think that there's some truth to that, excuse me, especially depending on the season. You can go back and find years where if you're trying to legitimately get the top 12, and especially if you stretch that to 14, you're going to find 5 SEC teams or 6 SEC teams. Now, what you're not always going to find is 4 Big Ten teams. Maybe you will most years now with the way that they've expanded that league, obviously, but I think if you're Sankey and you really want to arm yourself, you look at the historical data of how SEC teams and how Big Ten teams have performed against each other in the college football playoff from if you look at this is what SEC teams did from a net yards per play standpoint during the regular season versus what they did in the CFP. There's a little drop off there, a little less than, I think it's 0.76 yards per play below their average. But you put the Big Ten in college football playoff scenarios and their net yard per play output as a team historically over the last decade drops by over 2 yards per play, which is a chasmic amount in this data. So I think like the SEC has that leg to stand on. I hope that they realize that and sort of kind of fight for let's just keep this sport subjective like it always has been and go get the 12 or 16 best. Because if you really want to go down the wormhole of this and think about how we got here, it is quite interesting that, and I'm not saying this is a deep conspiracy or anything like that, but it is interesting that a selection committee that was very kind of Big Ten heavy in terms of its presence and its leadership, kind of stacked the deck on the initial rankings last year with a lot of Big Ten teams. And we got talk about Penn State having a good loss at home to Ohio State. So, they're in the top 5 and some of that. And those teams were kind of so high that they could never really fall out of the field. And they had 4 teams in when this whole thing kind of came to its conclusion. And now they're sort of using this first year of that new format as an argument. I'm not saying that that's intentional, but I am saying it's interesting because if one thing was a little bit different here or there, or if Alabama's in over SMU or maybe Ole Miss or whatever you want to do, the hypotheticals in the rankings and the subjectivity of the rankings, very easily this could be a different argument. And suddenly it seems like a lot of Big Ten people are like, well, we had 4 and we won the national title, so it should be that way forever. And it's like, well, hold up, guys. We've had 1 year of this format, and you guys are already trying to blow it up. Let's just maybe fix the seeding first and then, revamp the entire face of the sport later down the road.
I've said really for like the last 4 to 6 years, and of course Alabama was just like the exception with what Saban and the success, and then what Kirby's done too and others. But I always describe the top 10 or top 15 as the SEC bubble. There were so many teams in there that even if you lost, and maybe a bad loss, you fell out, but then a Vanderbilt would shoot back up. Or you know what I mean by that? There was always like someone, and now the Big Ten maybe is creating that too. Go ahead.
Well, no, I mean, you're right about that. Like Missouri last year, they get shut out at Alabama, lose by 30-something points. They get, totally beat down at Texas A&M in a game that I think kind of propped Texas A&M up in a way that was false by the end of the year. And they just could not fall out of the top 25 in the committee's rankings. So there's truth to that. And you have teams like Illinois or, I would get on every week after the playoff rankings came out and be like, why is Penn State, whose best win is a home win against Illinois by like 11 points, sitting up here where they are? And then, Illinois got in the top 25 and would just linger between like 18 and 23 for the rest of the year. So there is a feeling to me like often the top of the rankings are kind of set. And then the second bottom half of that top 25 is sort of designed to justify the top 12 or the top 14, whatever it's going to be.
I want to get into a couple more things other than what I wanted to come on with you about with us today. We knew Texas was good. Everyone knew from the year before, and they lost that dramatic game to Washington and almost came back with a miracle. How much would you say on a scale of 1 to 10, or what was the surprise level that they were that good? Georgia got them twice, but they were able to make such a dent in the first year in the SEC.
I think that there was an expectation that they would come in and win a lot of games. I don't know that, your Joe Schmo SEC fan would have expected them to make the SEC title, just kind of saying Texas is going to come in the league and make it the first year. But look at the schedule they had. How could they not? I mean, I'm sorry, like this upsets Texas fans when I say this, but they came into a league that was 16 teams, and they got to play 5 of the 6 teams who had a sub 500 SEC record this past year. Like, and it's an 8-game league, right? So I mean, it's 3-5 or worse, 5 of their 8 conference opponents, right? Like that's not that tough. You got Georgia and you lost to them at home, and then that what was the other test? Florida was a 500 team. They got to play them in Austin with a 3rd-string quarterback, and then they had A&M at the end. That was their league schedule. There's a lot of Kentucky and Mississippi State and Arkansas in that. So I would be deeply upset about that kind of imbalance in the schedule if I was like an Oklahoma fan looking at what they had to play coming into the league versus Texas. I think Texas was a really good football team this year. But I don't I still don't really know how good they were, if I'm being totally honest with you. I think that defensive line was great, and that's what travels in the SEC, run defense and running the football. And for the most part, they could run the football on everybody they played except for Georgia. And that ended up kind of being the Achilles heel for them.
Graham, let me rewind. I'm curious your opinion on something. If Georgia gets a targeting call against Haynes King, if that goes the other way and they wind up losing that game, are they out of the playoff too? And is the SEC looking at 2 teams? Or would that have put maybe Alabama in?
Well, what I would tell you is that it wouldn't matter because there's a 12-team playoff now, and Georgia was playing for the SEC championship.
Yeah,
and they won.
True.
So, I mean, because they won that SEC title, they're getting in. And in some ways, I think that may have been more fun, just as someone who kind of wants to see some deeper conversations happen about what we're doing to the sport and the devaluing of the regular season. But I don't know how you call targeting on that. I understand why people can slow that down, but like, you have a ball carrier in the hole and you have a guy put his helmet on the ball. Like, that happens all over the country every week. We don't talk about it every time it happens because it's not the only college football game happening on the Friday after Thanksgiving where a team that's gone 36-0 in the regular season the 3 years prior is on the ropes against a 5-loss rival. Like, I understand the situation that created the discussion, but I don't think that in reality it really was worth all of that thought and energy that went into it from some people, because I think it was just a good football play by Dan Jackson.
All right, last question, and we'll get into this much more when we get whatever they're going to call spring drill scrimmages or OT, whatever. How much is it burning that Georgia has been really good, but they haven't had that next level, which is hard. It's hard to win a national title. It took them forever to win one after Herschel. But what is it? What's the mood like in Athens, Georgia?
I think that there's a little restlessness for sure. I think that you have a fan base who probably expected to see some wholesale changes this year. Not wholesale, but expected to see some staff changes this year and hasn't. And I don't think at this point we're going to, unless something surprising happens here at the very end of February. So, yeah, I think like people are kind of saying, okay, we're going to do the Mike Bobo thing this year again, but we had, I believe, 7 games last year where we failed to score 10 points in the first half, and we have more talent than most teams we play. And I think that's fair to question, and that people are kind of asking that question about Bobo and some other areas on that staff or roster. But I also think that there's a fair rebuttal to that to say Kirby Smart has won a couple national titles. He knows what is required to do so. What I am forced to really kind of think at this point is if Kirby Smart is evaluating his program and he doesn't think he has a coaching problem, then he thinks he had a personnel problem of some sort in 2024 or a culture problem of some sort. And he believes that he can fix that for 2025 and that schematically and execution-wise that they will be okay. So I am very interested to see if that is correct. I'm interested to kind of monitor what we're hearing about some key positions as we go through spring practice, because they do lose a lot of snaps in certain places, but I don't know that they lose a lot of leadership in certain places. And so I think that's probably the low-key unknowable thing for Georgia's entire offseason is like, do they get back to kind of a team full of leaders and sort of player-led process, and less having one or two guys trying to drag the puppy with bloody paws down the sidewalk.
And I know you're going to miss Carson Beck's cold, dead eyes.
Oh, man. Yeah. Well, and I think Georgia's people are like, what do you think about Georgia right now? And it's like, they're having a quiet offseason. They're working out. And by nature, that's what football teams are supposed to be doing this time of year.
Yeah.
Carson Beck, I remember when we came in for spring first media availability of spring last year. And all the questions were about Carson's Lamborghini that had shown up on Instagram. And last week, there's a different type of story. He's getting luxury vehicles stolen, but that's not a Georgia problem anymore. It's not a Georgia story anymore. And I think that's probably a good thing for Georgia right now.
Thank you, buddy. Appreciate it, Graham. Have a great week.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
Graham Coffey with us, Dawgs Central.